So my name is Christopher Stewart. I'm a research fellow in Newcastle, a group leader, so I run a research group in a medical school here in the Leach building, and our main speciality or area of interest is looking at the microbiome. Failures are often quite hard to condense into a single word without swearing, I think, but I would go with disappointing. It was something that I had really worked towards quite deliberately, actually, for many years prior to that, which was to write a big fellowship application, and part of this process is to, if you're successful in the shortlisting, to get to interview. I always felt that where I would come unstuck would be the application writing itself and trying to bring together all these projects. The project proposal flew through the reviews, really positive feedback. So I went into this interview for this big prestigious fellowship really feeling like I had a very good chance of getting it. My CV I felt was really strong at the time. Like I say, I deliberately worked towards this event for several years at this point. And then, to put it mildly, had one of the worst experiences of my life in this interview, where within about 3 minutes of the question starting, I knew it was not going well, and it felt, because I'd put so much into it, like my literal world was just falling apart around me. So confronting failure in academia is something that you have to become very accustomed to. It is part of being an academic. You submit grant applications, which with a success rate of around 10% are unlikely to be funded. Even excellent science and excellent scientists won't always be funded. Similarly with your papers, you work for years on projects and you submit to a journal really proud of your work, and the reality is most of the time for these top tier journals, they're not going to be accepted, certainly not first time around. So rejection becomes part of the norm. Sort of confronting or dealing with these, I think, honestly just becomes easier with time, to the point where you actually, in some respects, expect things to be rejected upon initial submission, and then anything is a bonus. I think normalizing the process has also really helped me speaking to people about it. So ultimately, I often, why is this me? Is it my science isn't good enough? But when you speak to my heroes, effectively leaders in the fields, they've all and still do experience these rejections. The support available for rejection per se, I think, is minimal. That's not a Newcastle University issue, that's an academic issue, and I think largely because rejection is such a common part of the job, you don't necessarily have formal support. But as a group, my lab, we are very collegiate. We will support each other through rejections as they happen. I think as the PI of the lab, there's a responsibility for me also to manage the expectations of the students. I think in a way that my expectations probably weren't managed when I was a student. So I expected to submit to big journals and get in and have all these fantastic publications, and actually the reality is, like I say, that's really difficult. So managing expectations, I think, is really critical, but then secondly, just making sure that these people are okay when the inevitable rejections come through. In retrospect, when I look back at the sort of key rejections, the big fellowship failures, now in hindsight, I can actually see that because of that, I would not have, if for instance I was successful the first time, certain things wouldn't have happened, which have actually changed or pivoted my career in quite fundamental and substantial ways. It is interesting when you do have these failures, as much as it hurts at the time, when you look back, I think you'll always see little bits of evidence of actually it wasn't the worst thing that could have happened. So in terms of the best bit of advice I would give to colleagues or students alike, actually, I don't think it really matters on level of seniority if you're a PhD student or established professor, is that perseverance is absolutely critical when it comes to academia. If you just keep going, you will get there. And we have some fantastic researchers at Newcastle who have all felt at times, I'm not going to be able to get that grant and sort of establish my career, but actually they've just kept going. The natural instinct, as mine is every time rejection comes my way, is often kind of anger, actually. It's a bit of, oh, they've got it wrong, actually, they haven't read my application properly. And sure, that happens at times, but also when the dust settles a little bit and I give it a few days or weeks if necessary and go back to it with a cleaner head, let's say a little less rage, I can start to see actually they made some fair comments there, and maybe I overlooked that when I was writing the application or something. Failure to success in academia actually is quite a common phenomenon. I think as you speak to many academics, even about their most rawest failure, the one that sort of hurt them the most, in the end, I think even if they didn't get a particular grant funded or a particular paper published initially where they had hoped, more often than not you find it got in somewhere or they got the funding elsewhere. They maybe chopped the grant up into bits and got several grants out of it. As I said, failure is a common part of all these applications, but more often than not, with a bit of perseverance, it will yield success. So when it comes to the career, I think overall through PhD, postdocs, and then eventually into independence, I think when you look at somebody's sort of CV, it can look really smooth, like you've transitioned naturally from one stage to the next. But what CVs and often what people talk about doesn't actually portray the reality. Ultimately, people will always have this sense of, are things going okay? I feel like things are stalling. Things might actually even be regressing, or at least that's how it feels. Well, the reality is sometimes you just need to take that big step back to have this big lunge forward. And I often tell myself, particularly in times when I know I'm doing a lot of work, but I don't maybe have very much to show for it in terms of outputs, I often use the message, I don't know if it's like a Japanese proverb or something, but it's like a bamboo will basically just sit underground for ages until it germinates, and then it will grow a foot a day. And I often think I'm just this germinating bamboo with nothing to show for a couple of years, no big papers, but then everything sort of comes at once, and then I get my bamboo shoots, because it does come in waves ultimately. And that for my career, despite if anyone looked at the CV, would look super smooth and really successful, but there's a lot of inflection points, there's a lot of backward steps, and there's a lot of trial and tribulation within that. The reason I said yes to the Failing Forward project ultimately is because I think it's a fantastic initiative. So the one thing that we don't do enough of is talk about failure. Like I just mentioned, if you're looking at somebody's CV or you hear somebody present their data at a conference, it's sold in a very successful way, everything sort of worked out. But the reality is, in any individual's career, in their journey, there's so many points of, let's say, failure. And actually sometimes those failures can lead to much bigger and better things, which I think is important. I think people not giving up is really important. So for me, I give now a lot of career type talks, fellowship talks, advice to trainees or more junior members of staff internally and externally about trying to build your own independence or whatever it is. And my biggest ultimate message is perseverance is key. And the more we talk about failure, the more we normalize failure, the more likely people are to be resilient to it and to keep persevering. The reality is absolutely nobody has always been successful. Everyone's encountered failures and rejections, and it makes you a more rounded academic, a more rounded person. And the more we talk about it, the easier it is for everybody else in the community to deal with the inevitable failures that they're going to encounter.